everyone. Today our group is going to present Gothic architecture. Here is Gagan. She is going to tell about what is Gothic architecture and some of the history about Gothic architecture.
The history of Gothic architecture evolved over a period of 300 years. Their cells were bright and airy interiors with soaring spaces. A focus on the vertical pointed arches and spires, pinnacles. More emphasis was placed on decorative ornaments and stonework carvings. Gothic architecture spread throughout Europe, although the history of Gothic architecture moved more slowly, retaining heavy walls and tall windows. The earliest and most famous applications of Gothic architecture in England are at Canterbury Cathedral and Westminster Abbey. The views expressed during the Renaissance period of history led to a different name for the French style of architecture. Gothic appealed at the abundance of classical Roman lines and proportion. It was derisively called Gothic. This title alludes to the barbaric Goths or Visigoths who, led by their leader Alaric, sacked Rome in 410, which ultimately led to the fall of the Roman Empire. Gothic architecture is a style of architecture developed between the Roman and the Renaissance style of architecture. The history of Gothic architecture and the changing styles of building are characterized by the introduction of stained glass windows, gargoyles, flying butters, tall spires, and pointed arches. The different types of English Gothic architectural styles are divided into three distinct phases. Gothic architecture flourished particularly in France and England. The person generally honored as the originator of the Gothic style was Abbot Suger, whose and the Cathedral of Notre Dame of Paris, and from there to the rest of France. Close ties with the English meant that the new style soon appeared in Canterbury Cathedral and within a century throughout the island. During its peak in the 13th and 14th century, Gothic architecture dominated church building in France, Italy, Germany, and England. Gothic is the term used to identify a period that began around the middle of the 12th century and lasted to the end of the 15th century, in some places into the 16th. The name was coined by the later critics who scored the art of the period because it didn't hold to the standards of ancient Greek and Roman art. Architecture was the important and original art from during the Gothic period. The principal structural characteristics of Gothic architecture arose out of medieval masons' efforts to solve the problems associated with supporting heavy masonry ceiling walls over wide spans. The problem was that the heavy stonework of the traditional arch barrel vault and the groin vault exerted a tremendous downward and outward pressure that tended to push the walls upon which the fault rested outward, thus collapsing them. A building's vertical supporting walls thus had to be made extremely thick and heavy in order to contain the barrel vault's outward thrust. Gothic architecture is a style of architecture that flourished during the High and late medieval period. It evolved from Roman architecture and was succeeded by Renaissance architecture, originating in 12th century France and lasting into the 16th century. Gothic architecture was known during the period as the French style, was the term Gothic first appearing during the later part of the Renaissance. Its characteristic features include the pointed arches and the ribbed vault and flying butters. Gothic architecture is most familiar as the architecture of many of the great cathedrals, abbeys, and churches of Europe. It is also the architecture of many castles, palaces, town halls, guild halls, universities, and to less prominent extent private dwellings. It is in the great churches and cathedrals and in number of civic buildings that the Gothic style was expressed more powerfully, its characteristics lending themselves to appeal to the emotions. A great number of celestial buildings remain from this period, of which even the smallest are often structures of architectural distinction, while many of the larger structures are considered priceless works of art. A series of Gothic revivals began in mid-18th century in England, spread through 19th century Europe and continued largely for university structures into the 20th century. Gothic sculpture was closely tied to architecture since it was used primarily to decorate the exteriors of cathedrals and the religious buildings. The earliest Gothic sculptures were stone figures of saints and the Holy Family used to decorate the doorways or portals of cathedrals in France and elsewhere. The sculptures on the royal portal of Chartres Cathedral were little changed from their Roman predecessors in their stiff, straight, simple, elongated, and hectic forms, but during the later 12th century, the early 13th century sculptures became more relaxed and naturalistic in treatment, a trend that cultivated in the sculpture became more relaxed and naturalistic in treatment, a trend that cultivated in the sculpture decorations of the Reims Cathedral. These figures while retaining the dignity and the monumentality of their predecessors have individualized faces and figures as well as full flowing draperies and natural poses and gestures as they displayed a classical pose that suggests the awareness of antique Roman models on the part of their creators. Early Gothic architecture also began to observe such natural forms on plans more closely as is evident in the realistically carving clusters of leaves that adorn the capitals of columns.
Thank you, Gagan, for giving us a huge information about the history of Gothic architecture.
Nana, can you please describe us about the uniqueness of Gothic architecture?
Yeah, sure. I will tell you some of the unique features of Gothic architecture. Gothic architecture were used grand, tall buildings which swept upward with height. In the times before Gothic architecture, early medieval architecture struggled to spread the weight of heavy stone walls. This means that most towers needed to be short and buildings thin, otherwise the sheer weight of the high levels would collapse into themselves. One of the fundamental characteristics of Gothic architecture was its height. New building techniques enable architecture to spread the weight of taller walls and lofted towers.
So, what is the purpose of ground tall designs in Gothic architecture?
The purpose of the grand tall buildings was to reach up to the heavens, perfect for cathedrals and churches. Okay, now I am going to tell about the second feature about the Gothic architecture, which was the flying buttress. The flying buttress is the defining external characteristics of Gothic architecture. These buttresses effectively spread the weight of the new designs, taking the weight of the walls and transferring force directly to the ground. The flying buttresses was practical and decorative too. Rather than just being a simple sport, buttresses were often elaborately designed and extremely decorative. They appeared to dart and sweep around each building, giving a sense of movement and of grandeur missing from previous architecture designs. And the third feature was pointed arch. The innovation of pointed arch, which was the defining internal characteristics of Gothic architecture. Its significance was both practical and decorative. The pointed arch and effectively distributed the force of heavier ceilings and bulkier design and could support much more weight than previous simple pillars. The strong arches allowed for much more vertical height too. They literally reach up to the heavens. The Gothic architecture was not just a workhouse, it has an aesthetic value and beauty which influenced many other features of Gothic designs, most notably the vaulted ceilings. The vaulted ceiling. The vaulted ceiling was an innovation which led on from the achievements of pointed arch. Light and airy interior used in Gothic architecture. Castles in particular were places damp and mold as we were not built strong enough to support steel or stone roofing. Although these fortresses could more or less prop up wooden roofs and these let in rain. Before Gothic architecture's castles and early medieval buildings were pretty depressing places to live and worship in. Gothic architecture strove to be the exact antithesis to this older medieval style of building. The windows were generally tiny as force of the walls would collapse into themselves if they included any large glassworks. Now in Gothic architecture, they used light, bright windows and airy interiors, transforming castles and churches into more pleasant and majestic environments.
Sunaina, do you know what is the importance of gargoyles in Gothic architecture?
Yeah, sure. I will tell you the importance of gargoyles in Gothic architecture. One of the most noticeable features of Gothic architecture is the gargoyles. Gargoyles are decorative monster-like creatures perched along the roofs and battlements of Gothic buildings and castles. They are used for practical purposes. They are spouts enabling rainwater to drain off the roof and gush through their mouths before plummeting to the ground. However, gargoyles had another intended purpose: to strike fear into the heart of ill-educated medieval peasants, scaring them into the church or cathedral. Many gargoyles include elements of the grotesque, exaggerated, evil feature or threatening poses which would have laid down from on high. These creepy creatures undoubtedly have encouraged many to seek solace and safety inside of a church or cathedral. They protected cathedrals from demons and ghouls which roamed outside. The gargoyle is one of the defining characteristics and sticks to the mind even today.
Aman, can you please describe some of the causes of decline and destruction of stained glasses?
The main causes of decline and destruction are the political upheavals and religious unrest jeopardized the survival of stained glasses beginning in the 16th century, making decline and destruction imminent. Calvinist iconoclasm ended production in North, while Reformation attacks on Catholic churches destroyed a tremendous amount of glass, particularly in England. In 1547, the dissolution of the monasteries ordered the destruction of all decorative glass in churches. In 1633, many of the glass factories in Lorraine, France were devastated by war. From 1642 through 1653, the Commonwealth of England destroyed thousands of stained glass windows. Concurrent with the widespread destruction, Renaissance style began to take precedence over Gothic style. Murals and frescoes were in higher demand, and Italy was quickly becoming the cultural center of Europe. With the emergence of enamels in the 16th century, glaziers began to imitate Renaissance painters and applied thick coats of enamel to the surface, as if painting a canvas. Also, transparent glass gave way to heavily painted opaque glass. The more this was practiced, the more distant old stained glass techniques became. The artistry and skill that had reached their zenith during the Gothic period became a lost art. During the 19th century, Sir Joshua Reynolds and the other luminaries completely disregarded the medium and continued using enamel in this vein. For approximately 200 years, stained glass fell out of favor due to massive destruction, religious iconoclasm, preference for Renaissance style in the rise in image uses, and a lack of knowledge of old techniques. Stained glasses was not widely produced and did not again receive critical attention until its revival in the 19th century.
Indrajit, can you explain the types of Gothic architecture?
Yeah, there are three types of Gothic architect style. The first one is early Gothic style, second one is high Gothic style, and third one is late Gothic style. In early Gothic style, there are a lot of experiments. Some of them succeed and some of them didn't succeed, and the Gothic builders had to rebuild many cathedrals which collapsed. The primary Gothic style is categorized by Saint Denis. And the second one is high Gothic style. The high Gothic style began with the construction of Chartres Cathedral. The particularity of this building was that it was the first kind of that included from the original plan a flying butters. This also focused on creating an organic feel of light and space. at the gallery and lengthening of clerestory. An example of high Gothic style is Saint Chapel Church. And the last one is late Gothic style. The late Gothic style is quite different from primary ideas of high Gothic style. The style categorized by very lacy ornaments with multiple buttresses and a lot of small detailed performance. Although the height and size of design was entirely lost, or the focus remained on the inside unity, the lightness of stone, and the organic form.
Indradeep, do you know what are the domains where Gothic art emerged?
Yeah, there are three main domains. The first one is Gothic sculpture, second one is painting, and third one is religious art. In Gothic sculpture, they evolved from the fixed and long early style with a light influence of Romantic style into naturalistic feel in the late 12th century and early years of 13th century. Some influence from surviving Ancient Greek and Roman sculpture had been introduced into the treatment of facial expression and pose. The history of Gothic art began in France in the middle of 12th century when Sugar constructed the abbey from Saint Denis, which was considered the first Gothic building. The Gothic art movement in sculpture spread from France to Germany, where in 1225 was built the largest assemblage of 13th century sculpture, the Bamberg Cathedral. Later in 1240 was the building first statue in Western art since the 6th century, the Bamberg Rider. In England, the Gothic movement was more confident to tombs and decorations. In Italy, although there is still a classical influence of Gothic style made its way on sculpture and puppets like the one from the Pisa or the Siena puppet. An impressive work of Italian Gothic sculpture are tombs in Verona from the early late 14th century. The second one is painting. In the Gothic style, paintings appeared nearly 50 years after the beginning of Gothic architecture and sculpture. Around the 1200 transition to Gothic paintings is more clearly has been made when figures become more animated in facial expression and pose, being smaller in relation to the background of scenes and arranged more freely in scene. This transition takes place first in England around 1200, in Germany and in Italy in 1300. The Gothic style in painting was practiced mostly in the following four crafts panel, horseshoes, manuscript and manuscript illumination and stained glass. The horseshoes were used to main protocol narrative chart on church walls in the south of Europe. The history panel painting starts in 13th century in Italy, spread through Europe, becoming the stained glasses. The most complete record of Gothic painting is represented by the illuminated manuscript. These manuscripts provide a record of style in the places where no monumental work have survived. The third one is religious art. In general, religious art had a better survival rate than some equivalent arts, become a large proportion of the art realized in the period was religious commissioned by the church. The first Gothic art building was about Sugar in France, 12th century, and it is called Basilica. Some monastic orders like the distinguished style of Gothic art in the building all over the Europe. Even in late 14th century, evolved a universal style named International Gothic, which continued in late 15th century. Many regional variations of this style remained important.
Indradeep, do you think is modern design still influence Gothic style?
Yes, of course, the Gothic style never really disappeared. Artists or today still used to work in a Gothic art. Elements of as the element of Gothic style artists still use as inspiration of their present design work of gargoyles. The architecture and religious features that was found in church beginning in 1200 series, the rose stained glass and river velveting Gothic text, Gothic floored elements, the pilgrimage Gothic cathedrals which pointed arches and high towers, the Gothic religious painting and much more. In some design work, Gothic style mainly used to inspiration to create manipulative, forceful, tough, gloomy scene. The influence of Gothic style in music. Then the Gothic style was inspired even by music artists. Therefore, in 1970 appeared a Gothic rock, a subgenre post-punk and alternative rock. The main characteristics of movement is that the combination dark, sometimes keyboard-heavy music with disappearing and introspective lyrics. The beginning of Gothic rock gave birth to broader goth sculpture which included fashion club publication posters, CD covers and much more. This subculture grew in popularity of 1980 series, but there are still a lot of followers today. Some of the most important Gothic rock bands included The Crew, Virgin Pores and the Sister of Mercy. Mysterious unnatural creatures, the influence of Gothic style on the fashion. Music is highly influenced over people, therefore the members of Goth subculture created their own clothing style. The typical Gothic fashion includes back lips and backcloths and crimped hair for both male and female represented, short or long skirt, high heels, back corsets for girls.
Indrajit, thank you so much for giving us information about the Gothic architecture.